From my perspective as a scholar of genocide studies, I believe there are at least two major components worthy of serious consideration when working toward the establishment of the long-lasting memory of a tragedy such as the Srebrenica genocide. First, there is the critical need to develop and implement historically accurate and propaganda-free educational programs for implementation in secondary schools, colleges, and universities, and historically accurate and propaganda-free memorials and museums. Second, I believe any effort to establish long-term memory of a genocidal event must include powerful first-person accounts in various formats, that is, transcripts of the actual accounts, audio recordings, and videos by survivors, bystanders, perpetrators, and collaborators. The raw, unedited words, thoughts, and memories of such individuals, and where possible, along with the inclusion of their actual voices and countenances, will grab and hold the attention in the hearts and minds of students of all ages, as well as members of the general public, in ways that no other resources will. Such programs, assuming the information is absolutely accurate, meaning the information is based on solid and well-corroborated facts by most respected historians, bereft of any bias and anything approaching a one-sided or propagandistic approach that neither demonizes nor presents various peoples as saintly or above reproach, and is sustained over time, could very well serve to combat the untoward propensity of much of humanity to either purposely distance themselves from and or simply ignore the history of such a cataclysmic event as the genocide of some 8,000 Muslim boys and men at Srebrenica. In relation to future generations, such programs could help keep the memory of the tragedy alive versus eventually being lost in the fog of the past. Likewise, such programs are ideal for combating attempts by revisionists whose goal is to purposely skew the facts of events and present an alternative account of history, one that is politically charged, riddled with obfuscations, biases, and lies. So he's talking now about establishing long-term memory with programs. At the outset, it's imperative to understand that when I speak of education, I'm doing so in the broadest context possible. In that regard, I take my lead from Professor Lawrence Kremen of Columbia University, who cogently argued that professional educators and schools are far from the sole, let alone the main, individuals and institutions that educate. Among the many others are, for example, museums, memorial sites, mosques, churches, synagogues, radio stations, television networks, newspapers, and today, of course, the internet, among a host of others. Speaking of the interaction of the multiplicity of institutions that educate, Kremen refers to what he calls configurations of education. More specifically, Kremen asserts that while such educative institutions do not necessarily have a formal relationship, their impact is cumulative vis-a-vis the education of individuals, groups, and the general public. Significantly, he argues that each and every institution with a configuration impacts the learning of individuals in ways that may be complementary or contradictory, consonant or dissonant. Herein, then, when I speak of education for long-lasting memory, it should be understood I'm speaking about the integral involvement and efforts of a diversity of entities, including, but not limited to, the following: museums, memorial sites, research institutes, conference and seminar settings, books, refereed articles, the internet, oral history project, documentaries, speakers bureaus, and so on. Here's his 7 essential concerns. First, it is absolutely imperative that the history information presented in these places be predicated upon empirical evidence versus rumors, opinions, or biases. This should be obvious, but sometimes it is not. This problem has appeared in various museum exhibits about the Holocaust, for example, but what it appears most often is in secondary level textbooks, particularly in the United States, that either present bowdlerized history, watered down, or those written by committees versus historians who have a deep understanding. A case in point: claims that Jewish victims of the Holocaust were made into soap has appeared in school textbooks in the United States. In an article criticizing this, Lindquist reports the following: an egregious factual effort occurs in a book he refers to by Pearson, which states that in fully functioning death camps, the bodies of murdered prisoners were further desecrated Human fat was turned into soap, page 496. While reputable historians treat this story as false, students use this book, and those using it will be told that it is actually true. Upon learning that the story is false, these students become primary targets for deniers of the Holocaust, who use the false in one thing is false in all things arguments in proposing that the Holocaust never occurred. Second, the history and information in exhibits, curricula, textbooks, etc. must be vetted by the most noted historians across the globe to ensure that the history presented in these exhibits is accurate and void of unintentional biases. It does not include information that is freighted with political aims for the express purpose of placing one group or another in a positive or negative light. Tellingly, King argues that the government of Rwanda did not heed such advice and that it has been more than a little problematic. The Rwandan Patriotic Front is instrumentalizing memories of violence, accounts by Tutsi survivors, and using the genocide as a political tool. It bases its legitimacy at home and abroad on having stopped the genocide and thus having the moral high ground over the international community as well as other Rwandans. Moreover, by emphasizing the long-term persecution of Tutsis dating from 1959, the government considers Tutsi that were in and outside of Rwanda at the time of the genocide into a single survivor group, consolidates them into that. Therefore, in addition to the importance of these narratives for acknowledgement and peace building, promulgating Tutsi survivors' memories is central to the government's maintenance of power. Third, it is equally imperative that the history information presented in museum exhibits, memorial settings, school textbooks, school curricular programs, that they assiduously avoid excluding major and legitimate issues, facts, and perspectives. When the latter is evident, it opens the information to vociferous criticism of being uninformed, ignorant, biased, inaccurate, unfair, etc. This became the cause of a very heated issue, for example, during the formal hearings regarding the development of the California State Department of Education's model curriculum for human rights in 1987. Indeed, a firestorm of protest caused great upheaval at both the state and national level when individuals, various types and organizations asserted the key experiences of various groups, the Roma and Sinti, the Jehovah's Witnesses, and homosexual men, during the Holocaust were left out of the guidelines. It was argued that the aforementioned groups had been incarcerated by the Nazis during the period of the Holocaust and that it was poor history to leave that out of the recommended topics to be taught in the state schools. Demands were made to address and ameliorate such oversights. Many heated hearings subsequently ensued over these issues over the course of several months. Purposely leaving information out of exhibits, curricula, textbooks, etc. also became a lightning rod for criticism in Rwanda this past decade. Both many scholars and human rights activists decried the fact that the current government in Rwanda has purposely avoided and disallowed anything to be mentioned about the ongoing controversy surrounding the assertion that when entering Rwanda during the period of the 1994 genocide, RPF troops perpetrated massacres against Hutus. It has been argued that the current government does not want such information to be aired as it places in a bad light and raises a host of issues that not only cause it embarrassment, but may perhaps result in certain individuals facing potential prosecution. If you make that kind of claim that we've got to look at what the Tutsis may have done to the Hutus and so forth in Rwanda today, you risk arrest. I say that from personal experience. Both silence around this issue by the government as well as disallowing open discussion about it has resulted in ripples of distrust and anger both within Rwandan society and beyond. Fourth, this issue is similar but somewhat different from the aforementioned concern. Information in museums, at memorial sites, and school curricula and textbooks must avoid anything that approaches the whitewashing or elimination of controversies or questionable actions by any of the actors that were involved in the genocide group, including the victim group. Fifth, information for memorializing and or educative purposes must assiduously avoid minimizing, if not totally ignoring, the tragedy that enveloped groups other than the main group of victims, or even worse, not even mentioning their plight. Earlier on, survivors and family members of Roma and Sinti who survived the Holocaust and now resided in the United States were extremely disturbed by the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Council's, it was the precursor of the museum, ostensible minimization of the Sinti and Roma's persecution and extermination at the hands of the Nazis. There now is a display about the Roma fate in the actual museum building. Two more current issues are at work in Rwanda. First, as King notes, another of his authors, while there is space, however limited, for Hutu rescuers of the genocide at the Rwanda's main memorial site, and mention of Hutu moderates killed during the genocide by insinuation by other Hutu, there is no public space in Rwanda for Hutu memories of violence perpetrated by the RPF. Indeed, saying that there are unpunished RPF crimes is equated with the negation of genocide and may classify as punishable offense of genocide ideology, as Sam said before. Yet reports indicate that the RPF committed widespread killings during the Civil War and during the genocide. Since 1994, the RPF has engaged in killing and other violations of human rights in 2 wars in the Congo, as well as in the ongoing operations and in massacres in Rwanda. A more current example is that of the Twa in Rwanda. Well, the main antagonists prior to and during the 1994 genocide in Rwanda were the radical Hutus versus the Tutsi and moderate Hutus. The Twa, though a tiny fraction is 1% of the Rwanda population, were also involved in the genocide, both as perpetrators and as victims. But their victimhood is rarely, if ever, acknowledged by the Rwanda government. Sixth is his principles. It's imperative not to tag an entire group of people from the same nation as being synonymous with the perpetrators of crimes against humanity or genocide. To do so is not only poor history, but unjust and counterproductive. For example, for anyone to conclude that all Hutus were perpetrators of the genocide against the Hutus would be and is plain wrong. In fact, so-called moderate Hutus were targeted by extremist Hutus and killed in the most vicious ways possible. Concomitantly, there were a variety of, and to this day unsung, Hutus who both provided safe harbor for their Tutsi neighbors, thus risking their own lives. And still unrecognized in Rwanda and in various exhibits, memorial settings, etc., are those Hutu who perished because they reached out to try to help Tutsis avoid being killed. That is, such Hutus were discovered to be helping Tutsis and were deemed traitors by the Hutu extremists. I can't really neglect to mention here that when I was in Rwanda, I found out that those who were known to be rescuers almost uniformly were the small group of, in fact, Rwandan Muslims. It was their role which was important, and you can find them talked about with great appreciation in Rwanda today. Whether they were Hutus or Tutsis, I don't know which they were and so forth anyway, but they were Muslims, and they were known as that. What Sam does here, I've got 3 minutes left, is he moves to a kind of list of suggestions, really, a sort of recognition of that as various ways and things that you can do as well. And he has also a survey of which countries follow the suggestions of observations in this. Which ones, and he takes the Israel, Rwanda, and the United States and compares them as countries who have this sort of obligation. Here's the information. A designated moment of silence at some point during the year, all right, to acknowledge the victims. Israel, yes. Rwanda, no. Rwanda does 100 days of observations, but no moment of silence. The United States, no. A designated day of memory. Israel, yes. Rwanda, yes. As I said, 100 days. United States, yes. A public memorial gathering to recognize and honor the victims. Israel, yes. Rwanda, yes. The United States in Congress, yes. For the general public, no. A national memorial museum. Israel, yes. Rwanda, yes. The United States, yes. Regional state memorial sites there in various places. Israel, yes. Rwanda, yes. The United States, yes. We have a number of Holocaust memorials. Okay, major archives of first-person accounts of the genocide. Israel, yes. Rwanda, yes. What Sam says anyway. I got to find it myself. The United States, yes. Okay, a major research center, its focus is the genocide. Israel, yes. Rwanda, yes. The United States, yes. The genocide of note is addressed in school textbooks. Israel, yes. Rwanda, no. The United States, yes. A mandated school curriculum. exists that addresses the particular genocide. Israel, yes. Rwanda, yes, but it was heavily Tutsi-centric perspective. And the United States, no, but individual states do. Formal acknowledgement of rescuers in museums. Israel, yes. Rwanda, yes, but very limited. The United States, yes. Universities offer courses about the particular genocide. Israel, yes. Rwanda, yes. And the United States, yes. Graduate degree program focusing on the particular genocide or genocides, plural. Israel, yes, at both master's and doctoral levels. Rwanda at the master's level. The United States at master's and doctoral levels. Dignitaries on official visits to the nation automatically visit the major memorial site. Israel, yes. Rwanda, many seem to do so and are accompanied by high-level Rwandan politicians. The United States, no. Recommendations, and then he has a list again here of recommendations. I'm trying to think of, he's talking about aiming at recommendations to help us establish a long-term memory. And he talks about establish major museums and research centers whose exclusive focus is the genocide of the 8,000 Muslim boys and men in Srebrenica. I don't think Sam knows the details of what has been built there. And then he says he believes that something should be built at Potocari or Sarajevo and in another major city and so forth in the Netherlands is what he suggests as well. Okay, then he says, mandate that the Srebrenica genocide be taught in every secondary level school in the country. Make visits by officials from other nations to the memorial site at Potocari, which of course is going to happen come July 9th, 10th, and 11th. Require all future secondary level teachers to take courses on the Srebrenica genocide and teach it. And ideally, it should address such issues as rationale, subject matter, teaching methodologies, key resources, etc. Mandate visits by secondary level students, hold at least one annual major conference a year, develop and implement traveling exhibits on various aspects of it, establish an annual day or week of remembrance, commentates. I think, really, what would I say, what would be the grade that Bosnia gets right now for this and so forth? What would you give? Maybe an A-, B+, according to Sam's recommendations anyway. At least it's not quite yet an A+, that's for sure. Okay, thank you.